Well, thanks. The carbon price will have a surprisingly small effect on your lifestyle, your household budget, your business, unless you happen to own a power station, and thus on the economy overall. At first blush, the goal of switching to almost sole reliance on alternative sources of energy sounds like a very radical change, one that should have big effects on our lifestyles, our pockets, our businesses and our economy. So why am I so confident that these effects are small? Because the carbon tax and the emissions trading scheme, we're going to start with one and move to the other, have been specifically designed by economists, by economic rationalists actually, to ensure that the adverse effects are small. The scheme has 5 main features that will limit the disruption caused by our move to a low-carbon lifestyle and economy. First, we're giving ourselves 40 years and probably more to make the adjustment. Second, the scheme is not intended to bring about any overall reduction in the use of electricity. It's intended to encourage people not to waste electricity, but that's not quite the same thing. Rather, its goal is simply to change the way electricity is generated. Third, the scheme involves inducing people and businesses, and I might say the scheme's a lot more about affecting the behaviour of businesses, particularly heavy industry, than it is about affecting the behaviour of ordinary people in their homes. But the scheme involves inducing people and businesses to change their behaviour by means of increasing the relative prices of fossil fuels, not by telling people what they can and can't do. Fourth, the proceeds from the tax that brings about the increase in the prices of electricity and gas are immediately ploughed back into the economy, with about half those proceeds being returned to the households facing higher prices. In other words, it's no part of the scheme's design to try and change people's behaviour by making them poorer. Fifth, because the scheme will involve international trading in emissions permits once it gets going, much of the reduction in emissions will occur in other people's economies, not ours. People are overly fearful of what a carbon tax involves because we've never had one before, because they don't know what it involves, and because the opposition and industry lobby groups have taken advantage of our uncertainty to put the fear of God into us. It reminds me very much of how the Labor Party tried to exploit our fears of John Howard's goods and services tax. We subsequently discovered the GST wasn't nearly as terrible as we feared, and I'm confident we'll discover the same about the carbon tax. And note this carbon tax is a much smaller deal than the GST. Next financial year, the GST is expected to raise $52 billion, whereas the carbon tax will raise less than $8 billion. That's a pretty good comparison of how big a deal it is in terms of its effect on your pocket. The 10% GST, as we heard from the Minister, the 10% GST increased consumer prices by 2.5%. The carbon tax is expected to raise them by 0.7%. So again, a very much smaller number than was involved in the GST. The GST increased the prices of most of the things we buy, whereas the carbon tax focuses on the prices of electricity and gas. It's not too much of an oversimplification to say, it is an oversimplification, but it's not too out there to say that the scheme is mainly about changing the price of electricity. So you'll notice a 10% increase in the price of electricity and a 9% increase in the price of gas, but other retail price rises will be too small to notice. As for business, this is a big deal for power companies and industries that use huge quantities of electricity in their production process, but no big deal for most businesses. Treasury estimates that those industries employing 90% of Australia's workers account for just 10% of our carbon emissions. So the employers of 90% of workers don't have a big issue with the carbon tax. So the effect on employment is likely to be small, much smaller than the effect of the high dollar. If you really wanted something to worry about, you should be worried about the high dollar, not the carbon tax. It's a much, much bigger deal. Any economist will tell you that. And the effect on the economy's growth is likely to be small. The best estimate is that over the next 9 years, the economy will grow by just 0.5% less than it otherwise would have. Note, not that it'll get 0.5% smaller, but it will continue to grow, but its growth over that 9-year period will be just 0.5% less than it otherwise would have been. Thank you very much.